To see examples of what we talked about on this episode, along with further information, go to bunchofdorks.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to
Two Dimension Podcast,
the comic book podcast
with no direction.
Alright guys, you know that song, you know this voice, it's Rook. With me today, as always, is the 10-foot titan himself, it's Don. And we have a very special guest today. Everyone say hello to R. Alan Brooks.
Hello, hello.
How are you doing, man? I gotta tell you, I've been really looking forward to this one. We got the email asking if we wanted you on the show. I looked at your work, and of course, one of the first things I noticed about the email, how it says something about my mind goes blank, pardon me, about social activism in comic books. And my first reply to that is, that's what comic books are.
Right.
It is. It's always talking about social issues and different things. So I absolutely loved what I was reading in the email, and I just had to get a chance to talk to you. So I'm really happy to have you here.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here. You know, when you say that, man, I think about, like, the earliest issues of Superman from, like, 1938. Like, who's he fighting? He's fighting, like, corrupt cops. He fought, like, a guy who was beating his wife. Yeah. Like, he was immediately socially active. Like, from the very first superhero.
Absolutely.
You know, there was social stuff in there.
Yeah, and I mean, there's throughout the years, there's been different things. I mean, even Captain America punching Hitler.
Right.
We weren't even involved in that yet, and we were already making commentary on that. So I absolutely love the body of work that I'm looking at. But specifically, you just released Grieving Mall.
Yeah.
That looks amazing. Tell us a little bit about that. What brought you to working on this project?
So, right when the pandemic began, I launched a Kickstarter for my second graphic novel. That one was called Anguish Garden. Mm-hmm. And so I launched it in February, and then the lockdown began in March. And I was like, oh man, nobody's going to back this. You know, everybody's panicking. But it did work out. People did back it. One of the artists that I worked with on that was Sarah Menzel-Trappel. She did the colors for that book. Sarah's dope. She's really dope. Like, I will say this first. As a comic book writer, when I'm working with comic book artists, it is really hard to get things finished. Now, and it's not, you know, I think it's because comics are so much labor, right? Like, you can spend 8 to 10 hours on a page. So comic book artists have to deal with all of the normal insecurities that other, you know, artists have to deal with, plus all of that labor. So that's why, like, when you're reading Batman or something, you're like, I love this artist, and then the next month, who is this artist? Yeah. You know, because people burn out all the time.
Oh yeah.
So with Sarah, she was not like that. Sarah was like always like, okay, I'm gonna hit it on this date. She would send me a schedule, and she would hit all the dates, and I was like, oh, this is dope. Okay. So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, for the artist to be like, all right, here's the schedule, here it is. That's impressive.
Right. So as a writer, when I find an artist who's like that, I'm like, okay, we're gonna work together forever, as long as you want to, right? And so I was like, so there's this organization called Pop Culture Classroom. They're the ones who put on Denver Comic-Con, which I think they just sold to Fan Expo. But they're a nonprofit that does educational comics that are free. You can download them from their site. Yeah, so it's just popcultureclassroom.org, I think. Anybody wants to check it out. It's geared towards teachers, but anybody can download them. But I've been doing some work for them, and so I thought, well, let me try working with Sarah on something she draws, not just colors. And so they were hiring me to write a story about Juneteenth, and I got them to hire Sarah to draw it. Same thing. She was like, okay, I'm going to do it on these dates, and she did it. And so now we're like, you know, midway through the pandemic lockdown, and I say, Sarah, it's been great working with you. We should do something that we both own. And so she was down. And so the approach that I take when I'm talking with the artist is like, what do you want to draw? Because if I can get them to buy in on what they want to draw, it's more likely they're going to finish it. You know?
Well, yeah. You get everybody involved, loving what they do, and having a voice in it. You can get more. You can move forward much faster.
Yeah, you get it. Yeah. And honestly, as a writer, like if they want to draw underwater space frogs, or if they want to draw unicorns running across a rainbow, I can find a human conflict within that. You know, they're just putting the clothes on it, right? So
yeah.
So Sarah sent me like some examples of things that she likes. There's a lot of like anime stuff, some sci-fi movies. She tends to like things that are sort of mystical but don't have a clear resolution.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I hate those things. But it's just that, you know, like I tend to like things to resolve. So, but I processed all the things that she liked, and I thought about what is my version of that kind of story.
Right.
And that's where we started. And when we talk about what she likes to draw, you know, she was saying things like settings, she likes buildings. So we started talking about abandoned malls. I don't know if you guys have seen like those websites where they have like people break into the old malls and take pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have the comic book shop that I frequent is in what is basically an abandoned mall.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
So
yeah.
At this point, they're pretty much the anchor store for the mall.
Yeah.
Wow. That's saying something.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's something about when you look at those, malls used to be so vibrant and full of life, and now they're like mausoleums almost, you know, like.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I felt like, oh, this kind of really represents grief in a really beautiful visual way. You know, like the loss of something, the loss of life, the loss of activity, connection, everything that used to happen there. And so I pitched her a story about a woman dealing with grief who has to find something in an abandoned mall. And that's kind of what that story is. And Sarah liked the idea, and she started designing the characters, you know, and kind of went from there.
Nice. So now I also understand from some of the stuff I've read, Sarah was dealing with the drawing of the character with some body positivity issues as well. So,
Yeah.
Did you guys discuss that prior to starting to write, or?
Well, good question, man. So Sarah, so I pitched like an outline of the story before I wrote it, and then Sarah was like, "This sounds great. Would you mind if I made the main character plus size?" And I was like, "No, go for it." You know, like I hadn't thought about it. Like I hadn't even thought about what the character would look like, honestly, because I wanted it to kind of be Sarah's thing, right? So after Sarah finished drawing the book, so she penciled, inked, colored, and lettered it. It took her like 6 months or something. And so when she finished, she told me that drawing this, and Sarah's plus sized as well. So she said that drawing this character sort of healed her of some of her own body issues.
Nice.
That's fantastic.
Which was amazing, you know, because of course, when I'm writing something, I hope kind of that it will heal the world. But the idea that it has a positive effect on somebody who's working with me, I'm like, yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's beautiful. I absolutely love that, man. I mean, that's looking at the entire body of your work, you've definitely made a lot of commentary on the world as we know it, and you know, for you to talk about that, about body positivity issues, along with dealing with grief in one book, that's a lot to handle. Did you feel overwhelmed working on it at any point?
Well, you know, I would say no, because the book is about grief. The character, but the story is not about the character's body at all. Just the fact that this plus-size character exists in this story and is not having to think about like her size and stuff like that ends up being sort of the revolutionary thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is cool. You know, like I just think, especially for a woman drawing comics, and I say this, you know, as a man, so you know, but as a woman drawing comics, having to look at all of these sort of broke back, petite, you know, over-sexualized characters, I think it just ends up being a relief to see yourself sometimes. Somebody who looks like you, or dresses like you, or acts like you, you know.
And that's one of the things I've talked about before, is the ridiculous body shape of some of these characters. I mean, it's unrealistic and ridiculous. So I saw that about this character, and I really thought, what a fantastic thing to do. And I love the fact that it's not forefront in the storyline. It's just part of it. So
I didn't even think about that.
She exists.
I didn't notice that she was plus size. It kind of surprises me. You know, when you're talking about body types, here's an even funnier one. I grew up really tall and skinny and awkward, Bambi on ice kind. And I love comic books, and one thing that always bothered me, especially the Golden Age comics, Wildcat. He was a boxer, kind of a tough guy, and they had a really goofy guy with him that was really tall and stupid. And I think when he introduced him, the guy was like, "Don't tell anybody, but I'm a detective." And, you know, you look at Mickey Mouse, Felix the Cat, you know, the characters people like, they're small and kind of cool. And then you have the taller characters like Goofy, Foghorn Leghorn, you know, they were just, I thought, well, this bites to be tall, you know.
That's so interesting.
Well, and it wasn't until Star Wars came out and Chewbacca. I always loved Chewbacca because he was tall and cool, you know. So
that's true. Because like, what did you have? You had Lurch before. Lurch,
yeah, and as I got older and bigger, I've always been referred to by middle school girls. Oh, it's Lurch. Well, I don't really mind, but it's stuff like that. So saying that, I didn't notice that about the main character, that she was plus size. She was just a human being in a really rough situation.
Yeah, that's the thing, I think, is just showing people of different body types and backgrounds and sexual identity, all that kind of stuff. Like, just them showing up in the story is healing, right?
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't have to be about their struggle. It's just about, like, we're all different. Let's all, like, embrace it. And we don't have to pretend like there are no differences, you know? But we just respect each other's differences equally. And it ends up being, like, this, I don't know, just like it's a dope and healing thing, and which it was for Sarah. You know, I really love that. Yeah. By the way, you mentioned Wildcat. Did Wildcat have solo? This is Ted Grant, Wildcat, right? Like,
yeah.
Did he have solo adventures with a sidekick? Is that what you were talking about?
Well, it wasn't the Golden Age usually is a costume character and a civilian sidekick. Plastic Man always had Woozy Winks.
Yeah. And Snapper Carr for JSA.
Yeah.
Okay, I got you.
But no, it was just a country guy with a straw hat and a zoot suit type of jacket, and he wasn't bad. But those old Golden Age Wildcats were pretty good, you know. And it kind of smoothed off as the 50s came about, but the 40 ones, they were pretty neat stuff.
Yeah, I didn't even know he had solo adventures. So that's over here. Yeah, I've only seen him ever in relation to JSA or like backup stories, you know.
All those characters started out before the JSA.
Right.
Dr. Fate, Dr. Midnight, Wildcat was drawn by Erwin Hasten, who he did you guys are too young. There was a comic strip that was really popular in the 60s and 70s called Dondi. And,
I don't know that.
Yeah, it was extremely. It was one of those soap opera kind of strips, but it was about a little boy that was adopted, and I mean, he went everywhere. The one that started getting me and my friends, and we were 10 years old, was some rich kid was trying to run him over in a limousine while he was on a bike, and I'd be at school. Did you read Dondi? It was, you know, it went from one thing to another, but anyway. DC was reprinting those Golden Age stories and books in the 70s, and kids would write in, "Is that the Erwin Hasten that drew Dondi?" But he started out at DC doing Wildcat and stuff like that. So.
Nice. All right, little Golden Age lesson. I like it.
Don can tell you anything about anything you want to know. I mean, he's like the encyclopedia of comics.
But it's the research, because I could really be wrong, but. I wasn't around in the golden age.
So, where did you start with comic books? What brought you into doing comic books?
All right, so my father, when he was a kid, the only place he could find a black comic book character was in Nick Fury's Howling Commandos. There was Gabe Jones. He was like a jazz musician and part of the Howling Commandos. And I think if you look it up, like Gabe Jones, when they first introduced him, the publisher, the printer, decided it was a mistake to include a black person, and so they recolored him white. And so my father developed a fondness for comics. So when I was around 5, my father's a journalist. So when I was 5, my dad wanted me to read more. He wanted to encourage that, so he got me into comics, and he bought me Flash. And this was in the 80s when Barry Allen was on trial for the murder of the Reverse Flash, and that was I think Carmine Infantino was drawing it. But yeah, so that's when I got into it. But I liked them. I was always drawing and stuff like that. Around 10, I went to my first comic convention in Atlanta, which is where I grew up. And that was back when cons were like 200 people or so. But it was the con was there wasn't even enough interest in comics at the time for it to be its own con. It was like comic/Star Trek convention. And so I talk about in the podcast that I host that I couldn't find any black Vulcan ears.
Right, which is something I want to ask you. Have you ever found your Vulcan ears?
They make them now, man. Ever since Tuvok,
yeah,
come so far.
Yeah,
yeah. But yeah, so I was going to conventions and stuff like that. But this was at a time when I knew no one else who was into comics. None of my friends in school. I had one friend who went to a different school, who I would see every once in a while. We could talk about stuff. So we went to conventions together. But most of my life, all the way up, really until like my 30s, I didn't have like a community of people who like comics. But I was drawing them, and then also around 10, I got into hip hop. And as I was rapping and stuff like that, girls liked that more than comics. And so I kept reading them, and I stopped drawing them, and I put more of my attention towards like battle rapping and stuff like that. And so I worked on music for a while, like a long time. But the fact that you guys have never heard of me as a musician tells you how well that went.
Soul Daddy, you were Soul Daddy.
Yeah.
I've listened to both your. Well, I found 2 records on Apple Music.
Oh wow, the research is thorough. Nice.
Well, and I'll be honest with you, I was getting a little aggravated at you because I kept looking up your name. Oh, and then I can't remember why you mentioned something on your podcast, and I went to Apple Music and I found Soul Daddy, and I found In Love with a Dummy and A Safe Place.
Oh yeah.
And so I listened to them. It's quite well. I wasn't sure what to expect. Your rapping is very measured, just like how you talk. I could tell it was you, and I was really surprised at the music in it and the female singers. You had extra singers. It was pretty robust.
Oh, thanks.
So,
I appreciate that.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, In Love with a Dummy, I thought, well, that's it? There's not more? So that's it. You left me. But yeah,
I did a side project like 3 years ago with this musician Felix. Fast forward, it's called the Voodoo Pimps, and there's a song on there. It's on iTunes, but there's a song on there about an alien kidnapping my girlfriend and replacing her with a copy. So so that one's kind of fun. That's like 5 or 6 songs. And that one definitely embraced more of my my geek affiliations,
Nice.
But yeah, okay. So basically, I was pursuing music for a lot of years, and I even went on a few tours, and I did okay. Like I was making enough money to hire musicians to back me, and they were paying their rent off our gigs. But it wasn't like I just never could get the press to write about me. It just like reached a level and never got further. And I started to get really frustrated. And then I had I would use jazz musicians to back me. And I had a couple of musicians who were really like antagonistic, you know. And I'm like, okay, well, you guys, you're making a living, doing the thing you want to do. Like, what are you mad about? You know what I'm saying? Like, you just show up and play. That's not, like, what is it?
Yeah.
But it stressed me out. Go ahead.
Being on tour can really, you know, I don't know how your tour was, but like stuck in a van with a bunch of people day after day can wear on you. You know, you may be best friends, but I'm ready to kill somebody at the end.
Right, and then also you, like when you do the tour, you basically drive, go to the hotel or go to the venue, and then drive again. So you don't even get to see any of the places that you are. Yeah. I know full well how people get on stage and say the wrong city because they haven't gotten to see anything. They just got inside the hotel room in the van, you know.
Yeah. You were lucky enough to have a hotel room. We just slept in the van.
Wow. What kind of music do you do?
I toured with a punk band for a short time. Just I'm not a musician. I'm just a roadie and a photographer.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, but that was a couple weeks of interesting living.
Yeah, it's an experience. Yeah. But you know, a lot of that ethic I brought into my comic book stuff later. But so basically, I got frustrated with music, and I was so burnt out, and I was like, for all of this aggravation, I could do something square and make a decent living. And so I quit and started an insurance agency, which was the squarest thing I could think of, I guess.
I know. I've heard you say that on your podcast, and I'm just like, really?
Yeah, like, how did that happen?
You know, if you have to earn a living, it's a solid way to get it. You know, and people need insurance, so I kind of understand that. What I found interesting was there's two things. You're talking about rap. Mm-hmm. It changed the culture where before being studious and, you know, writing wasn't really cool. You know, after rap, it was something that was respected in the culture. Mm. And if Rook would have told me we're going to have a guy on that was a rapper that writes comic books, I wouldn't have put it together. But when you're talking about writing the music and then going in and writing comics and how you use the muscles, it made perfect sense. We've been talking about your podcast a bit. I just want to put it out there. R. Allen has a podcast called Motherfucker in a Cape. And when I first...
And yes, Don just swore, everybody. Mark the calendar.
I didn't mean... It's the name of the podcast. And I have to say, when Rook and I were talking about these projects, and I said, if you had a chance, I was trying to look at your comics. If you had a chance to look at this stuff, and he was excited to tell me what he did, and he's talking about the podcast. I says, I saw that he had a podcast. I asked to listen to it. And I wasn't sure what to expect with the name, you know, and I was expecting to listen to a show that would peel paint off the walls and, you know, kill all the grass. And so you can imagine my shock when I hear this very measured person doing a show, and I have to say, I think I've listened to 5 or 6 episodes, and I've enjoyed every guest you've had. They're all very interesting, and one thing, and it goes with you too, is you all found a thing to do, and you got success with it because you didn't stop. A lot of people, and I'm one of these people, you might have an idea, you say, I really would like to do a comic book or something. You'd play around and do some self-published stuff, but never go on with it. And I think it was the woman that did the Star Trek work and the cat stuff, and she said, you were both talking about going to conventions, networking, getting yourself out there. But it seemed like everyone you've talked to has discussed that and talked. I walked away tipping my hat and very impressed.
Oh, nice.
So don't stop listening to us, but I'll have a link to Motherfucker in a Cape. And I do recommend it. It's a show I enjoy, and after we do this show, I'm going to continue listening to it. And my favorite line was, you said your mom wasn't a fan of the name, but then she did listen to the show, and like myself, she goes, oh, this is actually quite good. So, you know, well done.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's true. My mom is a reverend, so she didn't care for the name. But she definitely she listened to the content of it and dug it. You know, it's a weird thing, man. Like, you know, I teach graphic novel writing at a Jesuit university, And the name of it's called Regis University in Denver. And the name of my podcast is the only thing that they won't put on my faculty profile.
Yeah.
They just say he hosts a very popular podcast, you know. Which I think is,
That's funny.
yeah, but and it's fine. Like I didn't necessarily expect them to, but I just think it's an interesting thing when you're trying to figure out like how to create art that engages people, but also how to get people to even check it out. You know, because like creating it is one thing, and then marketing is a whole separate thing. So like with the Grieving Mall thing, for example, me and Sarah just made a story that meant something to us. And then after it was done, then I started to think about what's the best way to market it. And when she told me the thing about her experience drawing a plus size character, I was like, oh, would you be okay talking about this publicly? And she was like, yeah. And so that became a lot of the marketing, you know?
Yeah.
It's just, and especially these days where people have such small attention spans, you know, that's be something that sort of grabs them quickly.
Yeah. Speaking of small attention spans, did you ever decide to do? Did you ever think about doing it as solo issues, or was it always going to be a graphic novel?
So, do you mean Grieving Mall specifically?
Yeah, Grieving Mall specifically.
So, Grieving Mall is a short story, and so it's about the length of a floppy. It's like 35 pages or something like that, and so it is a self-contained story.
Yeah.
The reason I decided to do that is because, you know, I told you I ask an artist what they want to draw. I also ask them how many pages do they feel like they can do.
Okay.
Yeah, because I have literally, at this point, 17 artists who have asked me to write something, and I did, and about 3 of them who've ever finished.
Yeah.
Ooh. Yes.
And that's why I'm okay. 12 pages? All right, it'll be 12 pages. 5 pages? All right, let's do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Deadlines can be killer. You know, so.
Well, it's also sometimes you just get overwhelmed with when you realize the amount of work you got to do. I've never done anything like that for anybody else, but I was trying to draw comics. One guy saw what I was doing and said, "It looks like fun. I'd like to write for you." And I can't write, even though I tried. But I just told him, which I still feel that way. I think it's kind of overwhelming when you get a script and all of a sudden you don't really know how to break it down. And he says, "Well, I try to describe what I got, but you know, I could see looking at the script and just thinking, oh my God, you know, you got to break the thing down." I've heard of Alan Moore always talked when he wrote a story.
Yeah.
He used to draw out a quick sketch. You're breaking the thing down, and he said he stopped doing it because he worked with really seasoned artists and they didn't use it.
Right.
But you know, if I got something, I would appreciate if the writer kind of broke it down and I could veer from it. But you know, it would make it less overwhelming to me.
That's cool to hear, man. I mean, that's how I approach my scripts, actually. So it'll be like panel 1, this happens, and then I use a Google image search to put like a photo that is sort of what I'm thinking of. And to be very clear with the artist, I don't want you to draw this, you know, do what you feel.
Right.
But this is just so you know what I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
But I do agree. I mean, you really have to love comics to draw comics. Like, comics are a lot of work. It's a lot of work to draw comics. If you're a person who draws like a single image, you can sell that for anywhere between $25 to like, you know, $500, right? You draw a comic which takes a lot more time and a lot more effort, you can sell it for like $5. You know?
Yeah.
But you can sell multiple issues, people engage with it differently. But I think comics are not for people who don't love them, who don't love drawing them.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of artists at this point. I've reached enough of stature, I guess, that people know me as a writer, where there are people who are just like, you know, general artists, and they're like, "Hey, you should do a comic sometime," and they're like, "You don't want to do a comic. You think you want to do a comic." But it's really intense, you know.
Yeah.
I've drawn a few, like, so there's this company called Akashic. They do like detective anthologies. So, but they'll do it by city. It'll be like, they call it like noir. So it'll be like Los Angeles noir, Trinidad noir, Atlanta Noir, you know. And so they're about to put out a Denver one, and I'm the only graphic novelist that they asked to be in there.
Yeah.
And so I wrote a detective story, and then I drew it, mostly because I knew that I could hit my own deadlines. And I took that opportunity. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. What was the name of the comic, the story?
Oh, well, the company is called Akashic, AKASHIC. And it'll be Denver Noir. It's coming out in May of next year.
Oh.
And so I'll have a story. It'll be in like Target and Walmart and all the stuff, I guess. But in drawing that story, I was like, first of all, I put it at Mutiny Information Cafe, the store that I mentioned to you guys earlier. They have all of this stuff in there, all of these books. And when I was drawing it, I was like, why did I set it here? There's so much stuff to draw. You know, It took a lot of time. Like, I don't love drawing comics. I love having drawn comics. I love it when it's done. I'm like, oh, yeah, I did that. But, you know.
The process of getting there, it's like, all right, come on, hurry up. You got to keep moving.
Yeah. So I get it when people feel overwhelmed, you know.
Right.
But either you're going to do it or you're not going to do it. You know what I mean? Like,
that was
you have to
something.
decide for yourself.
Yeah, that was something I found interesting. You had mentioned on the podcast you drew, because I just saw the stuff you wrote. And so I was trying to find it, and kind of find out on your page with the free comics, you have a Supermaniac?
Super manic, like manic depressive. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I have to admit, I really enjoyed this, and I was thinking,
Oh, really? Nice.
yeah, it wasn't anything what I was expecting, and I loved how it ended. It was a contained story. I liked Lois. I liked how she was dealing with things, and I liked how he was kind of anxious and just couldn't stop. I like different takes on Superman, even though this is Supermanic, but I was really shocked. I was thinking, okay, where's he finding all these artists? Wait a minute, he did this. You know, a lot of times, especially when people are starting out in comics, they draw a lot of figures and not so many incidental objects. You drew cityscapes from above, and they're great.
Thanks. It's a pain.
I like I said, the coloring, everything on it, I was really surprised that you're working with other artists. I understand it gives you more of a diversity in body of work, but what I've seen with your drawings, it's quite nice. I hope you continue with that.
No, I really appreciate that, man. You know, like I posted that. I haven't had a lot of feedback on it, to be honest. So I wasn't really intending to draw any stuff, because my thought was there are all these artists that I know who want to create comics. Let's make these things, you know.
Yeah.
And ideally, if the system worked, I would write them what they wanted, they would draw it, and I would have like 5 books coming out a year. You know, that's kind of how I was thinking, right?
Yeah.
Because it does take me a long time to draw stuff. So with that Superman story, which, you know, is a fan story and is free on my site, like you said, there was an artist who, 3 years ago, he was like, hey, what else? What are you working on these days? And I was like, well, I'm working on blah, blah, blah. But I have all these artists who don't finish anything. And he was like, well, you've never written anything for me. And I was like, oh, okay, so you're saying if I write you something, you'll draw it? He says, yeah. So I say, okay, what do you want to draw? How many pages? He told me. I wrote this story. He told me he would do it in 3 months. And then 2 years later, he had not drawn it. So I was like, during lockdown, I was like, I guess I'll try drawing it. And that's how that story ended up, you know, getting done.
No, it was terrific. Superman was one of my favorite characters when I was a kid. I really loved. I talk about this in the show a lot. I was basically starting to save comics when I was 10 in the early 70s.
Yeah.
But the Superman comics at the time, even though I bought them, it was always social unrest, student riots. And there's that weird Sand Superman story that I didn't quite understood that went on, but then the other Superman books didn't have him. I really liked reading the reprints from the 50s, you know,
Yeah.
and even sometimes the 40s. Those made me happy, but as time's gone on, it's just more of the same.
I'm struggling with that myself because I love superhero comics, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what I grew up on. But like, am I really interested in another Batman Joker fight? Like,
Yeah.
every once in a while, somebody brings like a new perspective. Like I like Tom King's run for a while. You know, like he seemed to just bring a different heart to Batman, Catwoman. But it's hard. Like it's hard for me to stay invested in these characters in a way. Like I like them generally. You know,
Yeah.
I'll go see a movie. But in terms of buying comics every month, and even just the fact that you can spend $5 on a comic and not get a whole story, you know?
Oh, yeah. That's been discussed here quite a bit, even though
Yeah.
I still buy them.
Yeah, at length.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's one of the big name comic companies' major issues is that they don't have human stories. I mean, they don't have conversations about what life is. It's always one big epic event after another, and I don't know how many times I can watch these guys save the planet from some, deranged maniac anymore.
Right.
So I find myself leaning more and more towards indie comics where people are doing something so different, so stuff that we know Marvel and DC and Image will never publish,
Right.
because they're just like, well, that's not gonna sell. So, but the indie comics industry, it's growing, and I absolutely love it. I love the fact that people can self-publish now. You can publish online. It's comics. Comics, I think, are more accessible to creators and readers than ever before at this point.
Right. Yeah, I kind of feel the same way, like looking for something human, right? Like it just seems to, I don't know, like what I liked about Tom King's run on Batman was that he was exploring who Batman was as a human being in a really strong way,
Yeah.
And so every once in a while you find those, but it is a tricky thing. I'm really digging Joelle Jones run on Wonder Girl now with that she's writing and drawing.
I'm not even aware of that. You are, Rook?
So,
No,
Yeah.
I've seen it on the shelves. I haven't picked it up.
DC did one of their events, Future State, where it was like they're imagining what the superhero would be like 200 years from now or something. I don't. But basically, it'd be like, who is Batman now? Who is Wonder Woman? Like different people have taken the legacy on, right?
Yeah.
And so in that, they introduced a Brazilian Wonder Woman, who I think was the most popular of the lot of characters that they introduced. So then now they're doing a series with her, and they're calling it Wonder Girl. And you guys, Joelle Jones from like Lady Killer. That was the book that she wrote and drew.
I bought one of those.
Okay.
I didn't buy them all, but one of them, the cover just grabbed me, and I had to have it, and I've never seen any others.
Yeah, that went on for a while, and so this, I would say, her art is even better. But so she's writing and drawing is a fun character. The art is beautiful, but I think she's getting overwhelmed, like we talked about, because by issue 3, there was another artist doing fill-in pages. That's the hard thing in comics. And then as far as monthly comics, man, it's a weird thing because I looked at a study. It said that manga outsells American comics in America.
I actually believe that now.
Yeah, and I think it's because we're still, American comics are holding on to that model of, there was, okay, so we know that comics were basically drugstores, grocery stores, that kind of thing. And then in the late 70s, early 80s, we got the local comic shops. And there was a woman whose name I cannot remember now who worked for Marvel, who pioneered.
Joe Duffy.
It wasn't Joe Duffy, because she wasn't a writer.
Oh, Carol Kalish.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah, Carol Kalish,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, you're right. He does know everything. Look, you weren't kidding. Okay.
No, well, I get things wrong, though. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so Carol Kalish, so she pioneered reaching out to all the local comic shops and doing exclusives and teaching them how to use cash registers and all this stuff.
Yes.
And basically, comics industry, Marvel and DC have been coasting on that model for the last 3 or 4 decades since then.
Right.
Yeah.
Whereas the world has changed, they're still like, we'll just keep doing that.
No, that's what you're saying, though. There's a lot. She's completely forgotten. But
Yeah.
a big thing with her, what he was talking about bringing in cash registers, a lot of comic shops, they use tackle boxes for a money box. And she basically taught them, no, it's, I remember these.
Yeah, no, I know it's true.
Saying that, when comic stores came out, distribution was so spotty. So if you're trying to buy a certain comic, all of our collections are Swiss cheese. You might have one or two issues of Spider-Man, a few issues of Fantastic Four, and then you wouldn't see them for a while. But if you went to the comic store, they had them all, and then they had, all these, old comic strips printed in books like Nostalgia News, Yesterday's Comics, and the Star Reach stuff, and the Underground comics, which basically burned through my soul when I saw them because I grew up in the Bible Belt. But they had stuff that you didn't even know existed. But anyway, Carol Kalish, she basically taught them how to be a store, and how to set it up. And she was always fighting with editorial, because this is the key point. Editorial was basically wanting to blow all the competition out the water, flood the market, do this and that. She says, you don't want to do that. You want to work with them. And when she started doing that in the early 80s, that is my favorite time in comics, because all of a sudden you started getting Pacific Comics, Eclipse became a bigger publisher, and Fantagraphics was out. And that's when you started getting Love and Rockets, Mr. X, Dalgota. It was...
Comico.
Yeah.
Remember Comic? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Matt Wagner came out with his stuff. But like I said, I never stopped loving comics, and there's great comics now. But, that's when we got Gru the Wanderer, which is still one of my favorite comics.
Nice.
And it just, the diversity, that just popped out of that time. And then Marvel and DC was doing nice stuff, too. And then she was basically set up to become the editor-in-chief of Marvel. And then they passed her on, and that's when everything kind of went down the toilet. Marvel did start flooding the market. We all know what happened,
Yeah.
But,
the 90s.
Yeah. Well, everybody puts the 90s down, but
different covers, holograms.
There were still a lot of comics I loved in the 90s. I don't see I didn't like what was going on in the 90s, but there were still comics I bought and loved in the 90s. That's when they started...
I'm glad that you were faithful, man. The only period of my life that I didn't read comics was during the 90s. I was in college, and I was like, maybe I outgrew them. I don't know, because I'm buying these and I don't like them. And then I went back and read the ones that I had from the 80s, and I was like, no, these are good,
Yeah.
But I just think it just was a time that wasn't really for me. Even though there were exceptions, like Kingdom Come came out during that time. I liked that a lot.
Yeah.
Marvel, so there's a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, I actually took a lot of time off in the 90s as well, and it was mainly due to the fact that we had the comic shop wars around here, where they were just destroying each other left and right. And we had 3 comic book shops, and we went down to 1, and then it disappeared, moved way north of here, way south of here, and there was nothing. And, so for years, I didn't get any comic books. There just was nothing. I kept all my boxes. I toted those boxes around with me for years. I made furniture out of them when I was broke. I had a TV stand that was comic book boxes.
Wow.
A shop popped up right down the street from me. I had a young kid at the time, so I took him in there, and he learned to read from comics.
Yeah.
A little ash can comic book that the guys in the shop gave him when he was probably like 3. So, comic books have such they're such a great way to get kids reading and to be able to keep them engaged, but also a chance to teach them something as well. I find it fantastic. I read an article recently about unique words read that comic books have, let's just say twice as many unique words per book as an entire novel. So kids are reading harder to read and hard to pronounce words in a comic book than they ever will in, say, a Harry Potter novel.
Right. Well, there was a study done about that. I was on the New York Comic-Con panel like in 2017 with this woman, Dr. Meryl Jaffe, and she literally wrote a book on how comics help struggling readers.
Yeah.
But basically, her premise was when you're looking at a comic, first of all, somebody reading a comic, they can get most of the story from the pictures, and then go back and read and connect the words to what's happening. That's one. But the other is when you're reading a comic, you look at panel 1, panel 2. You have to extrapolate what has happened between those two panels, because nothing's moving, right? So your mind has to fill in the information. And that's the same skill that is used to extrapolate what's happening between words and connect them. So building that skill by looking at comics visually also helps a struggling reader.
Interesting. So it's the same brain functions for both. That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I never heard that either. But yeah, and I mean, her book, she's been going to conventions and talking about that stuff for a while. Yeah.
I love it.
There is something about that. I was 9. And I always had comics. I always liked them, but they didn't last. I'd have them in the house. I'd just have a few. And then a couple moved next door to us. And the man had just gotten out of the Army. And one time I walked over. My mom had me bring, I don't know, a cake mix or something to the woman.
Yeah.
And I looked in, and they had stacks of comic books on the coffee table. Superman, Viking prints, all this stuff. And I looked, and then the man said, "Do you want them?" All he would do is read them, and then he'd just give them to me. And so over the summer, I read, and that's when I started spending most of my allowance money, lawn mowing money, on comic books.
Right.
And I went back to school, and I could always read well, but all of a sudden, I'd be finished, and everybody's still reading. And I thought maybe something's wrong. And then the teacher started to notice it. She started coming and questioning me, and then she sent a note home to my parents. I thought I was in trouble, but my dad was elated, and then my dad said, he was asking me, and I said, yeah, it was kind of weird, I don't know what happened. I says, maybe it was all that reading you did over the summer. I didn't do any reading over the summer. Because, my dad was always getting on to me riding my bike to the library, not understanding that I couldn't check it out without a parent, but he said all the comic books you read. Comic books are reading material? Okay, but yeah, it's reading material, and it's just, I think Rook agrees, comics to us is just a happy place.
Yeah. I definitely learned a lot of words I was mispronouncing them.
Yeah.
But chaos, because there's so much chaos in comics, like Day of Chaos, right?
Yeah.
But I was like 7 years old saying Chaos. Yeah. Stuff like that.
Yep.
I hate to one-up you, but I said one of the words that I've always read wrong on this show, and Dallas embarrassedly corrected me. It's not hyperbole, it's hyperbole.
Nice.
If you read words that you've never heard pronounced, of course you're going to see them wrong, and so all these words that Rook was saying that we learned through comics, we never learned how to say out loud.
Yeah. Okay, I have a hyperbole. This is exactly the opposite, but when I used hyperbole in a rap when I was like 15, and I was so proud of myself.
Yeah.
But the line was, if you were to be ever serving me, that'd be hyperbole. That was it.
Okay.
Go
ahead.
Yeah, I think, what was I going to say? I lost it. Okay, whatever. We'll come back to it.
I want to ask you about the rap. Do you just do this on the fly, or do you write things down, or is it a little of both?
All the recorded stuff is written.
Okay.
But when I'm doing shows, I'm freestyling. So I'll take words from people in the audience and compose things based on that. Back when I was younger and battle rapping, that was supposed to be all freestyle. So I would just listen to what they say and try to come back at them,
Battle rap is possibly the most impressive thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And I don't know how brains work that fast. I
served in the
I'm
Navy.
Like 2 weeks later, thinking of a comeback.
I served in the Navy with a guy that's when I learned. This is 1983, and
Okay.
he was from the Bronx,
Yeah.
and he did rap. I didn't know what that was. He was with a group that was in a movie called Wild Style,
Yeah.
and he ended up he was with the Fantastic Five, and he was trying to get out of the
Oh, wow.
Navy because they were in Japan. And he saw my drawings, and he said, "I like your drawings, but you got to find a new way." And he kept saying, "Like, I do rap." I had no idea what rap was. He said,
It was newish then.
"Yeah." He says, "All your stuff looks like the Smurfs." Well, okay, I like the Smurfs, but one time he had a boombox with a microphone, and
Yeah.
we were plane handlers on the flight deck, and he just got the microphone and he just started rapping on this, and he was basically telling the girl what we did, and he was he was naming all the aircraft, and goes, "That's all we do is fly, fly, fly. Come on, girl." And I thought, how is he doing this? He was just making things up, and we're all kind of amazed. And then I was in the passageway working with another guy, and he was trying to come through. I said, "You can't come through. This is taken apart. This is secured." And he had to get through the other side.
Yeah.
He was a great guy, but kind of nonchalant. And the other guy gets up with a tool and is trying to stop him. And Whipper just starts, "I don't care who you think I am. You know that one day you're going to be my fan." And, on and on. And the guy he puts the tool back and he lifts his arms doing that. And he walks through. And I said, "Whipper, how do you do that?" I just pulled out of my head. Well, obviously, his head works 20,000 times faster than mine, because I still can't do that. So, go ahead.
I was gonna say, there was a lot of building that skill in my early 20s. I would get with a group of rappers and we would be in a parking lot. We'd play something out of a car stereo and freestyle for hours and just work on it. And so eventually it comes easier. It's definitely stream of consciousness when I do it. And then sometimes later, because I don't remember what I'm saying always. And then later, that night when I'm settling down, I'm like, "Oh, I said that. That was good."
Okay, so you do it too, where you're later on thinking about it, and you're like, "Oh, okay, yeah, no, that was good. All right." All right. See, my problem is my brain can't hit it at the moment, and it's later on, I'm like, idea.
All right. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, you guys were talking, Don, you were especially talking about the similarity of writing songs to writing comics. So one of my favorite kinds of rap is storytelling rap. Slick Rick was a big influence when I was younger. And so I thought eventually I got onto the idea that most pop songs have 3 verses, and then most stories have 3 acts. So then in songs, I would try to follow that structure. The first verse introduces the characters and the conflict. Second verse explores the conflict. Third verse resolves it. And so when I started writing comics, which was 2016 was the first time I tried to write one, a lot of that was on my mind, how to structure it and bring things in. So, all those years of writing songs, it was just expanding on that vocabulary in a lot of ways.
Right. I want to talk about something it wasn't on your free comics, but it was What I Miss with the Colorado Sun.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that. I love the stories. I love the premise. See, it's another word I've never said out loud. Premise. Yes. Thank you. 16 tries. But I like the artwork. Can you talk to us about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I guess, okay, I put out the first. I was saying that I got into insurance and I burned out and I ended up hating it. So I put out my first graphic novel in 2017. That was The Burning Metronome. Strongly Twilight Zone influence. Off of that, that university that I mentioned, the Regis University, they contacted me and asked if I would want to teach it in their master's program. That was something I self-published, and they were like, "Hey, do you want to come teach it at our university?" I was like, "Huh? Right? Okay. Are you sure?" So that was cool. Made me a professor. Then there was a newspaper that was being started by reporters who left the Denver Post to start their own paper. And that's called the Colorado Sun. It's free online. There's no ads. There's no paywalls. It's just subscriber based, like NPR or something, right?
Yeah.
So when they I guess Googled, Denver comics and found me, and so we went and met at Mutiny Information Cafe. That's the where I was telling you guys about.
Right.
And so we
there.
right. So we met, and they were telling me, hey, we're starting this paper. We've been journalists for like 30 years. We want to do something that engages with local Colorado politics. And, we want something that isn't just, that feels very Colorado. And so I was like, okay, give me a week. And so I thought about it. And I had never written anything short. Like weekly comics, usually like 3 panels.
Yeah.
And I was like, because I've written like a graphic novel, but it means that every time you have to have a punchline and bring up, whatever your topic is, like it's very challenging. So I thought, okay, it could only be like 1 or 2 characters, and then you could kind of build from there. But then I was like, but if the characters are the same demographically, like if it's 2 young women or 2 black men or whatever it is, if they're the same, then whatever they talk about becomes sort of the black opinion or the female opinion. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I wanted to come up with characters who were demographically diverse, and then I tried to think about why would they be talking about current events? Like, why would they be talking about it? And so I came up with this idea where there's a woman who was in a coma for 30 years, white woman in a coma. She comes out of it, and her next door neighbor is a black man in his 20s, and they just talk about things that are happening.
Right.
And so it's what I missed, because she missed all of these things, right?
Yeah.
And so the first year of the comic, we just finished 3 years on that comic, but the first year began with a lot of her talking about what she missed. But now I've gotten more used to writing in that way, so I don't use that premise too much. They're just friends who talk about things,
Right.
Well,
Yeah. Either on the balcony or park bench. There was one where they were in the car.
So were they talking about Weird Al on that one, or what?
I think he was something about the way she drives.
Oh, okay, yeah.
The ones that always stuck with me, it was later ones, but when she was talking about cassette tapes and he didn't know what they were.
Oh, yeah.
And also when she was looking up friends on Facebook and was saying, oh, they got so old.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I kind of went through the same thing, because when I left home, I completely fell off the face of the earth for people for 35 years.
Right.
And then I was on Facebook, but I was always trying to find people I went to college with, or I was in the Navy with, or I knew later on.
Right.
And I found a couple of girls, they just popped up, that I went to high school with, and I wrote them and said, I went to high school with a girl with your name. I says, is that you? And I mentioned a couple of things we did. Yes, it's where have you been? And they popped up, and then I got up the next morning and I had 45 friend requests from other people that I played basketball with, or
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, it was a thrill, because these were people I was close to, and the only way I could describe it was like when you find a record or a tape or CD that you listened to before and hadn't listened to in years, and you pop it in and all those feelings come back. And then I found there's a cycle. We talk for a while, and then you're kind of background. You see what they do once in a while, and another one pops up. But the way you write that, even though I see an older lady, she seems to be kind of the same age as her neighbor. And when they talk, it kind of comes across to me that way, even though her appearance is completely different than what she is. I've never would have thought of that.
It's great that you picked up on that, right? Because if she's in her 50s and she was in a coma for 30 years, her last memories were in her 20s.
Right.
So she is emotionally and mentally the age of her neighbor.
Right.
But she's having to deal with the reality of the world perceiving her as a woman in her 50s.
Yeah.
So,
right.
Yeah, so that, like all of that is kind of built in there. So I'm glad it came across.
Oh, absolutely. I absolutely love that. it's been, I think Rook had a different experience. To me, it was a really tough scavenger hunt, and I finished the Burning Metronome, the free. You had a free issue that you could read, and I really enjoyed it. And then it finished. Oh man, God! And then I looked. You could buy the other issues, and so I was getting ready to do it. And then I thought, wait a minute, I got all this other stuff I need to be familiar with. So I went on, and again, with What Did I Miss? I had to stop because I kept going. I read them backwards, and I thought, God, I've got too much to do here. I didn't get a chance to go to your TED Talk, so I haven't listened to that. But what did you discuss on your TED Talk?
Oh, the TED Talk's fantastic. You got to listen to that, Don.
Yeah, I will after we finish. It's booked and it's available. I don't know if you've been to the blog. We have a blog on each episode, everything we talk about. We have images of what we talk about, and we have links, further links. Okay. So everybody listening, you can go to this episode and find all this stuff. And I have links to the free comics he has. And if you're like me and you want to know what happened after that first issue of Burning Metronome, you can. But and I'll also have links to Soul Daddy and his podcast. But yeah, I really enjoyed it, but it was an embarrassment of riches. And I have to say, it kind of irritates me that you started doing this in 2017 and accomplished all that, where I think I've probably drawn 20 pages of comics since 1989.
Man, do you have any of your art up where people can see it?
Yeah, it's on the blog, on the sidebar. It's at the top. It says, buy these guys. We have Rook's 50,000 portals for the internet. And we have my blog, and on my blog, under the banner, it has drawings, comics.
I'd love to check it out.
Oh, thank you. The comics are really. I'm not a writer. At the time, I was putting a lot into it, but there's stuff, and the stories are really embarrassing for me to look at, but I still put them up anyway. But
good. Well, listen, I know that you were asking kind of about the TED Talk. I talked about the importance of art because I feel like people invalidate art a lot. Like they make you feel like you're being foolish or silly if you're trying to pursue art.
Yes.
But no social change in history really has happened without art fueling it.
Right.
But here's what I'll say in terms of my output. So, I 2016 is the last year I was an insurance agent. I hated it so much that I just quit. And I thought, okay, because if I die right now, I'll die as an insurance agent, and I didn't want that to happen. And I was seeing all of these rappers who were my age. I was like 40 at the time, and I was seeing all these rappers my age dying, and I really thought about, okay, what do I want to put into the world? Like, if I died tomorrow, what would I want? And so that's part of why I write comics that are about things that are important to me. But that's also why I put out a lot of stuff, so like, and it should be more. Remember I told you I've written things for all these other artists that have never been done. So like, but so it was Burning Metronome with Dion Harris and Matt Strikebot, and they were the artists on that. That was a hardcover that I sold out of when I did the TED Talk. So I got to reprint that. An Anguish Garden was an allegory for leaving white supremacist movements. I got death threats over that book.
I read that.
Yeah, which is pretty crazy. And then the What I Missed comic we just collected into a book. There's the Grieving Mall thing. So that's on the site now. You can buy the book of it if you want. And then Grieving Mall put out. And then basically I was just like, this is what I'm here to do. Like if people are going to like it and buy it now, like that's what I'm doing. And I'm going to put out as much as I can. And I'm not going to wait on people to tell me I'm a writer. And I do deal with the same fear that everyone deals with. I would say the only thing that's different about me is I don't usually feel the fear until after I'm finished. As soon as I'm finished writing it, then I'll be like, oh, that's awful. But I'm done now, so I'm not just out, right? But I think that fear that holds back a lot of artists, I think it's a tragedy. It's a real thing. Like so many people deal with it. Some of the most talented artists I know, the world will never hear of because they can't get over their own fear.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's very true, and I completely understand where you're coming from with that. I mean, art was my entire life, and I got to high school, and the family was like, "Yeah, art's great, but you can't make money that way." So I got driven straight into graphic design, and I did that for a long time. Absolutely hated it.
Right.
I can't stand it. I mean, I still use all the stuff on what I do now, but for a few years I stopped doing all art because it just burned me.
Well,
just recently, when I was in art school, the painting professor comes by and he looks at my stuff and goes, "Yeah, painting's not your thing, is it?" I'm like, "No, I hate painting." Now I find myself painting miniatures for D&D, for Dungeons and Dragons, and I absolutely love it. I mean, I've fallen in love with art again. It's fantastic, and I mean, you can ask my wife. I've in the last 2 weeks I've painted 10 miniatures.
Nice.
Well,
something I never thought I would do. So
you're one of the most artistic people I've ever met. Every time I go to Rook's house, it's all completely different. I'm the type of person, when I set something up, it's going to stay that way for, once in a while I might make a few changes, but it's rare. I set it up, and that's the way it's going to stay. And every time I go to Rook's house,
because I'm completely neurodivergent and have to keep moving.
He paints his doors different colors and patterns, his outside house. There's a back room he has, and when I went in there, he has all of his books and a pinball machine. And then I go in, the pinball machine's gone. He's built this coffin to make a shelf. The little kiosk we have, it has windows, then it didn't have windows, then it has windows again. It's like a Tim Burton film, but it's real.
But it's all about, like you were saying just now. What happens when I fall down tomorrow? I want this to be, my house is like a giant art piece, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I definitely understand that drive that you have to just create and do things. That's fantastic, and hopefully these artists get off their butts and get some stuff done, so we get more. So
yeah, it's been pretty crazy. Like because like I said, I spent all those years trying to make things happen with rap, but the world at large didn't really care, right? But then I put out a graphic novel on my own. I mean, self-published, not like with a publisher, and suddenly people care, right? Like I just completed an exhibit for the Denver Art Museum. Like, they reached out to me to write and draw a comic that's going to be part of their Western exhibit. And it's going to be there for they said 5 years or something. That opens next month.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and I'm like, how am I in a museum? Like, when I was a kid, I couldn't even get comics at the library. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And now I'm teaching it in a master's program at a university. I have stuff up in a museum, like, and then I'm hosting a podcast for the Museum of Contemporary Art, where I interview different artists, and that's because they heard my podcast. It's called How Art is Born. And like, how is all of this happening? You know what I mean? Like, it's really cool, but it's also like, and even when we did the book, like, I published the book for What I Miss, which is drawn by Corey Redford. I meant to say that earlier. She draws it. But when we put the book together, I got a local politician to write the foreword, Representative Leslie Harrod. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, making comic books is somehow I'm becoming friends with politicians. Like, it's just so interesting to me. Because none of that was possible before, Yeah. But of course, none of it would have happened if I didn't put something out.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's what I said earlier. You and all the guests you've had on the show, it seems like you're going in one direction, and you started, either you followed the direction or you changed it, but you got it out there. You didn't give up. And you got it out there, and different speeds of success for everybody involved in it. But
definitely,
I found that interesting. It's easy. we all of us that do the show have all worked as graphic designers. I was a graphic designer for 40 years, and
Okay.
I'm old, but a lot of people that I worked with had stopped drawing when they got out of school. They'd see me drawing. See, I used to draw. I mean, these are kids 20 years younger than I was.
Right.
And I said, "Why did you stop?" "Well, I'm too tired." Well, I was working 8 to 10 hours a day, sometimes 7 days a week, and I was running a martial arts school. And I still made time to draw. I couldn't stop.
Right.
But I see that all the time. People have something they like to do, play a musical instrument, draw, sing, and then they just kind of stop. So if you can pick up anything what we talked about so far, don't stop. You may not get the level of success, but you'll be a happier person, you know?
I agree. Yeah. And I think a lot of artists don't recognize that finishing something is one job and then selling it is a whole other job.
Yes.
Yeah.
So just the fact that you created something, but first of all, finish. Definitely finish. That's the number one hardest thing. And once you've done that, then you have to start thinking about, okay, do I need to learn how to write press releases? You know, do I need to do an event to try to get people to come? You know, like all of this stuff. Do I need to come on podcasts to make new friends? You know, like all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, it's all like a part of it, but it's a lot. But I think the benefit of having done insurance before I did this was it was the first time I had a job where I didn't make any money unless I sold something. So I had to learn how to hustle. And I just brought that hustle to the comics, you know.
Did that help organizational skills doing that?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, it definitely did.
I didn't think of that till you said it. Yeah.
Yeah, like running my own business, scheduling things on my calendar, you know, like, so every morning when well, first of all, I don't get up in the morning. I'm not a morning person, but when
You're
I get
among
up,
friends.
my morning, you know, like I immediately like look at my calendar. What have I put there? What do I need to work on? Because, you know, if I didn't have it, I probably would have been late to this, you know, or missed it or something. But it definitely got me together on stuff. And in terms of like, so like when a chance like the Denver Art Museum comes up, then it means that I'm going to plan it out. I'm going to hit my deadlines, which also means that the next time that they're looking for an artist, or if they talk to somebody else who's looking for an artist, most artists don't hit their deadlines, you know? So like, if you're going to make a living in art, you got to figure out how to work. It's work.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that's for sure. That's one good thing I can take away from my time as doing design work. That, you know, the schedule is definitely something that I try and keep to, even though nobody buys my art.
People buy your stuff all the time.
Well, I was making those stupid shelves for a while. So,
You couldn't keep up with them.
Yeah, well, you know. Listen, I can only make so many coffin-shaped bookshelves, okay? No more, okay? It would be one thing if they were all the same size, but every order I got was from, like, a different size, and all the math had to be redone. So, yeah, I was doing woodworking for a while, and I made the mistake of making one coffin shelf, and then that's all anybody wanted.
Well, they were really cool, you know. I mean, I thought they were pretty neat.
Yeah, you say that after having to redo all the angles and you know, working with a saw that has has an incorrect angle finder on it.
Oh, that would drive me insane. All right, there's two more books that we haven't talked about on your free comics list that I can't get past. You have one called Gerald's Lament, which is basically a side story from the Burning Metronome, and I enjoyed what I read. But what blew me away, I thought, okay, so he worked with the same creative team. It's a different artist.
Yeah, that artist, Julian Yates, that dude is the truth. That dude always hits his deadlines, like always. I can't always afford to work with him.
Right.
He deserves what he asked for. So he drew Ninjago, he drew Tales from the Crypt, he drew Bionic Woman comics. Like, he's done a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, I looked him up. Also, when I say I thought it was the creative team from Metronome, some of the effects that was used in the story is in this one. I thought, I was shocked when I realized it was a different artist. I wasn't jarred. I thought I was just reading a continuation.
Nice.
I really like The Burning Metronome, and I like Gerald's Lament, and the story idea is just, you said earlier it's like the Twilight Zone, but it's, and I don't want to give away, I only read one issue and then this one part of the side, but it's really clever how the story worked, and it's I don't like doing puzzles, but I like reading about stories that, a puzzle turns out. And this one, it seemed like it was working that way. And I thought, well, this is, why didn't anybody else think of this? And then the other book I was going to talk about was Neighborhood Watch, which unnerved me to no end. And here you got a kid playing, and then this goes on. Too close to the world we live in today, and I'm sorry about that, but the art style I really liked. And then I found out, like you said, it's the same artist.
Yeah,
but
that's versatile.
Yeah, and when I see some artists, with the exception of Mobius, change styles,
right?
One of them is really awkward, This one is not. When you said he's the truth, that you spoke completely correct. It is the truth. He's Neighborhood Watch, and it's a complete piece. If you only read them all. I love them all, but read that one. It's something else.
Yeah. I got to say, Neighborhood Watch was being from Florida. Everything that happened with Trayvon. I mean, that was So, like, immediately, as soon as I saw the hoodie, that's the first thing that comes to my mind.
Well, how could it not?
But the twist at that end, that was, oh, man.
Yeah.
Well, also, two things about that one. The Denver Art Museum is going to display that one. They're going to print it out and put it in their, their studio in December, I think. But the way that one came about, that's the first time I've ever tried the Marvel method with an artist.
Oh, yeah.
So, I guess for people who are listening aren't familiar, Marvel method is writer doesn't write the script fully. They kind of tell the artist the story, see what the artist draws, and then go back and script it based on the art. So me and Jolyon had worked together enough. During a protest that occurred during lockdown, Jolyon hit me up and he was like, hey, do you want to do something, about this stuff? And I was like, yeah, man, anytime I get to work with you,
Yeah.
And so I put together an idea. I asked him how many pages he was thinking, because that's the key to getting it done. And then I wrote an outline, but it didn't have everything specifically done. And I was also busy with other things. But I was like, I'm just going to see what this feels like. So I threw it out to Jolyon, and he decided the format, he decided the style that he was going to use. It's kind of like an Archie-esque style, and he thought that would make the sort of sinister underpinnings of the story more striking, because you're reading like this sort of cutesy style,
Yeah.
And so he illustrated it, and he laid it out in such a way, he was thinking like people are reading comics on smartphones more,
right?
So that one's laid out more for that, So that's all him. And then when I got it back, then I went through it and I did the lettering.
Oh,
and so, I was able to do based on what he did, I was able to kind of build off of that and stuff like that. And then there's just little subtle things like the characters sort of holding things behind their back. I'm being non-specific to not give it away, but like if you look at it, there's subtle things in the art that are all Jolyon. And I really love working with that dude.
What you said, I can't say enough. It's and it's all there. You can go to this and read the story, and it's when I say unnerving, it is. It's upsetting, and but it's something you should read, and it's fantastic. The storytelling, the story, the idea, it has it all. And
Thanks.
But again, I'm really shocked that it was the same artist as that in Jared's Lament.
Yeah.
Now, going back to the project you started off talking about, you received the death threats, and I'm sorry about that.
Oh, Anguish Garden.
Anguish Garden.
Yeah.
Now, that one I'm kind of behind on. Was that a Kickstarter that you have?
Yes, yeah. So that was the second Kickstarter. When I mentioned earlier that I started a Kickstarter the month before the lockdown began,
Yeah.
that was Anguish Garden. And so just the announcement of the Kickstarter, saying that I was writing an allegory for leading white supremacist movements, was enough for somebody to send me like death threats on Instagram on Christmas Day. I was like, go be with your family.
I love that. Christmas Day. Really? I mean,
Right.
y'all got nothing better to do.
Well, you have some free time.
Right. So, but I read this book called Rising Out of Hatred. It's about Derek Black. Derek Black is the son of Don Black, who is the creator of Stormfront, the biggest white supremacy website in the world, with an ironic last name that their last name's Black, or whatever. So Derek was raised to be sort of the next great leader of the movement. So when he was 11, he learned how to code, and he programmed a kids corner on the white supremacist website, right? So this dude is raised, and to do this, they send him to college because they want to get him like legitimacy. And in college is the first time he has to face all of the people he's been taught to hate. So over the course of the 4 years, he starts rethinking the white supremacist views that he was raised with. Yeah. But in the meantime, he was still co-hosting a white supremacist radio show. He would like sneak out of his dorm room and host it on his phone with his father. But eventually he left. And he has been like touring the country, speaking against white supremacy, and has gotten threats from his old like family and friends and stuff like that. But in reading that book, the thing that stood out to me was, in his youth, he really thought he was doing something good. He thought he was protecting family. He thought he was protecting culture. And I thought, okay, so how does somebody think they're doing something heroic and turn out to be the villain of the story? And that's what I wanted to examine in Anguish Garden.
Right.
Yeah. So the book itself is not about white supremacy, but it is about a woman who, she's like a teenager, but she thinks that she's doing a good thing. And the more that she acts on it, the more you see, oh man, she's doing some messed up stuff. And what I think is, if you're doing something out of love or protection or these good reasons, if you do not have compassion, that's where it turns evil. Yeah. Willing to do an evil thing in order to protect a good thing, and it becomes an evil thing. It gets ruined by that. So that's what I'm exploring at Anguish Garden. And the book we put out is the first of 3, but it's like 70 pages. So it's a full story, but I gotta it's be a 3 arc.
That whole story is set in a post-apocalyptic world after an alien invasion. So brilliant concept for setting that kind of a story in that setting. The aliens, but what made is that what she's hunting, or is it alien collaborators?
So the idea is, this is after the war, and a certain segment of society is infected by the aliens,
quote unquote.
Right. And the infection means that they may turn into aliens. So her job is to bounty hunt the people who are infected and force them to go into government quarantine, which is funny because I wrote all of this before the pandemic happened. Yeah. But so here's what really happened during the midterm elections in 2018. I noticed a lot of particularly right-wing news talking about these caravans that were coming from South America. Yeah, and they were going to like rape and kill and murder and stuff like that. And as soon as the elections were over, we heard nothing about them.
Right.
Yeah. Like it was just used to scare people into voting for them, right? And so I thought, okay, so basically they made these people into monsters. So what would it be like to like have a story where there are actual monsters, and in her mind she's hunting down the people who might turn into monsters, but she hasn't really seen anybody ever turn into the monster. That's what she's been told, that's what she's been raised on. And so that's where it kind of begins. It's like her, kind of like trying to protect humanity. I put air quotes up. Nobody can see that if they're listening, but protect humanity. So that's the stuff I wanted to like explore. Like, there's so many places in our mind where we make other human beings into these monstrous, animals. Yeah.
It's hard to change your thinking if you've been told something your entire life.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's with ethnicities, it's with sexual orientation, everything, culture, and even when you realize it, sometimes you don't want to, or you don't know how to move on with it. So what you're saying is quite poignant. Now, with the Kickstarter, did you I glanced at it. I think you surpassed the goal. Am I reading it correct? Good job.
Thanks.
So
yeah, it was surprising, like I said, because it was right when the pandemic started. So I thought nobody was going to want to give. But I think the fact that I got death threats over it motivated people to make it happen.
I've been wanting to ask you about that. Has this been reported?
Yeah, the police investigated it. It was somebody in Colorado, but it was through an Instagram account that didn't have any clear identifying, pictures or whatever.
Yeah.
So they couldn't find the person. But that person was trying to sick Comicsgate on me. You guys familiar? Yeah. So they were like, death threat, and they're like, #Comicsgate, come on. But fortunately, it didn't happen.
Yeah, we've talked privately in regards to the Comicsgate issues, and that's just pathetic.
Yeah, we don't give it anything.
Yeah.
Like I said,
I'm sorry. You bunch of crybabies. Get used to it. The world is diverse. The world is full of different and interesting people, and they are all starting to be around you. Get used to it. And yes, they are quote unquote infecting your comic books. You poor things. Yeah.
I gotta say, it's such a weird thing because even though I was the only black person and the only kid going to a lot of these conventions when I was a kid, it was the one place where we could all come together and talk about this thing that we love, because we couldn't really talk with many people about it in our normal lives. So the comics community was the most welcoming and embracing part of my life for so many years. And it's so odd to think that there's like a subculture of people who are angry that people are participating in comics. It's weird.
Yeah, well, you're going to get
really
all kinds.
I mean, I don't understand it. I mean, we've read stories for years. Just take X-Men, for example. I mean, we've read stories about accepting people for who they are, no matter what. And now all of a sudden you're like, well, no, you don't belong in my little niche of the world. Well, it goes against everything you've always been fanboying over your whole life. So I don't understand the mentality. I don't understand that ideology. It blows my mind. It really does.
Yeah.
You know, there was a comic book in the 80s called Zot by Scott McCloud.
Oh, yeah.
And one of my favorite stories, it was a guy that had it was kind of a computer system called Zybox. And there was something that happened, and the guy that created it was so upset about it, and he just asked Zybox to fix it. So Zybox took over everything. It's, on this world, it was everything's connected like the internet, even though we didn't have that at the time. Anyway, the whole story finished. They stopped it. It was controlling the whole human race all across the globe. And somebody was by the microphone that was issuing all these orders, and their wristwatch was ticking. And one of the people that stopped it said, "Oh my God, what's going to happen now?" Because he just heard tick, tick, tick. How's all these people going to react? And everybody just started dancing with everybody else. And the girl was like, "How is this happening?" And the guy, Zod, he realized, he says, they're picking out the beats that they want to hear. And they were dancing to the beats. So even though it's a monotonous thing, everybody's going to have a different reaction. Us on the show, we all like comics, but if somebody sends something, we've had comics sent in for review. Rook had mentioned you're going to get different reviews, opinions from each one of us. We're all people,
Right.
And,
Right.
So I don't know. I've seen this all the time. It's something you love, a music, a band, a TV show. They're not going to see it the same way you do, even if you love it all the same. So I wish some of these things weren't happening in the world, but at the same time, I'm glad not everybody's the same, because if they were all like me, you wouldn't have rap.
Right.
So
what's next for you? What you've got museum, you've got of course Anguish Garden's out now. Grieving Mall's out now. You can pick that up. What's next? What are you planning now?
Okay, so this is crazy. My first job out of college was producing a TV show for a televangelist.
Okay.
Right. It was the church I grew up in, and then when I went to college, it grew to like 20,000 people. It was a terrible job. But I quit after 5 years. I worked there for a while, but I quit when they fired my best friend because he started being successful in other places. So I was like, never again for television, right? I just didn't do any more television jobs. He stayed in television, ended up winning an Emmy, now edits films and stuff like that. So when he read The Burning Metronome, he was like, yo, I want to do a feature, man. Do you think you could write it? And I was like, yes. And so I read a book about movie scripts, and I wrote a script. Spent like 6 months on it. And we're raising money for it now. We're going to try and film it next year. It's called The Straw Man.
Yeah.
It's a political thriller about different types of protest. And so that would be the next thing. I want to do a graphic novel about Barney Ford, who most people haven't heard of. I only heard of in the last few years. This guy escaped slavery and became a millionaire, and became so powerful that when Colorado wanted to become a state, he obstructed it until they removed the racist voting laws. Then he helped Colorado become a state.
Really?
There's a stained glass window of him in the state capitol. I'm like, how do I not know who this person is?
Yeah.
So there's somebody here who did a documentary on him for Rocky Mountain PBS. So if you Google his name, you can probably find it. But that was like last year. I've been trying to get this story made for like 3 years, and publishers don't seem to be interested. So I'm just going to do it.
Right.
But I did do a 2-page story for Pop Culture Classroom that Jolyon drew. That was the first time me and Jolyon worked together. And that's free on the Pop Culture Classroom website.
Nice.
So that, and like I said, next year in May I have that detective anthology coming out, and I'm the only graphic novel person in it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Busy.
Yeah. It's
That's awesome, though. I mean, it's fantastic for you for being working in this industry for such a short amount of time. Really, you've really gotten so much work. That's fantastic. I love it, and it just really shows that you have the drive, you go for it, and it's really something to say about the comic book industry as well. That we can. So a good writer can be, absolutely taken in and just makes amazing work. So
I appreciate it.
It's one thing, though. We talk about this in the show all the time. There's a lot of stuff out there, but I wasn't aware of it till Carolyn sent us the invite.
Yeah.
We say this all the time. There's all kinds of music. There's all kinds of stories. But this was completely out of my line of sight until recently.
Well, here's what I would say, and this is maybe for anyone who's listening who wants to do stuff. You don't really have to wait on gatekeepers anymore, man. Rookie said the thing about being embraced by the comic industry. That isn't quite true. I just started making things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But by comics fans, yes. But so I put out 2017. I put out Burning Metronome, and then I went to every convention I could go to. I went to Phoenix. I went to Denver. I went to New York. I went to San Diego. I went to like a whole bunch, and I got to know all of these editors. There's one editor from a particular company who I won't say, and like he liked what I wrote. He said, "Oh yeah, we can have something for you." And so I emailed that dude once a month for a year. No response. Saw him at the next San Diego, and he was like, "Oh man, I got something for you." And so, so I wrote something. He was like, "Can you write it? It's behind. Can you write it in 2 weeks?" I said yes, and I wrote it in a week. I sent it to him, and I waited like 3 weeks for feedback. But anyway, they put it out. It was good. I hit the deadlines. It got good reviews, and then nothing else.
Yeah.
So what I've learned is, one, if I'm waiting on people to tell me I'm a writer, I wouldn't be doing anything. Secondly, the way the technology is now, you can print things, you can make your own thing, but you do have to be willing to hustle. That's why I do so many things, because I have to make money, right? Like I have to make a living. Yep. But the other part of it is, like, you get to determine. Oh, okay. So you don't need 1 million people to follow you if you're an independent artist. If people talk about a dedicated 1,000, I don't know if you've heard that before.
Yeah.
So if you have, like, 1,000 people who will consistently buy your stuff, you are making a living, And so that's what all that hustle and push is about. And the reason, largely why you guys wouldn't have heard of the stuff I've done is because mostly it's been like local,
Yeah.
And I'm just now moving into some national stuff, which I'm happy about and working towards. That's part of why I'm doing this with you guys right now, because the more people who support what I do, the more I can create things, and that's all I want to do is I want to create cool comics.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a hustle, but I'm happy. I'm really happy, and I'm happy that you guys just said a lot of good stuff about the work I do, so I really appreciate it.
No, it's
well, the work speaks for itself. It really does. I mean, and like I said, that first line of that email, I just kind of went, wait a minute. Yeah, comic books are about social issues, social commentary. Yes, I agree 100%. Wait a minute. I got to talk to this guy.
Right on.
Yeah, when we get an email, we send it out to all the members, and I say, check it out. Let's talk about it and see. And then when I did talk to Rook, he's like, when are we getting this guy on? He was all excited.
Nice.
And there was a couple of times where I said, well, does he have, can I read some of his comics? Have you seen, what, have you looked at the links? No, I hadn't. So, it's just, you're juggling different things. But, again, the story ideas you had, it's, they're unique. But the close thing I think, and it's not like this, the Twilight Zone always caught me.
Oh, yeah.
Well, they always, I've seen people try to do the Twilight Zone, and I mean, I really liked the Outer Limits show they had in, I guess, the 90s. I used to watch that.
Yeah.
But and I liked the one from the 60s, but mostly not the stories, except for Demon the Glass Hand. It was mostly just the monsters they had. But but this one, it has that feel. Your story ideas are unique and clever. They always keep me reading them. I hadn't seen that in a long time. I never stopped loving comics. I can't wait to go to comic shop to pick out the 4 or 5 comics I get every month. But the close thing I think of was when Chris Claremont was doing all those Marvel team-ups with John Byrne and the X-Men with John Byrne and Star-Lord. Chris Claremont had really neat ideas.
Yes.
I think he lost the plot later on, and it was basically a lot of plot lines that went all over the place and never tied up, and and everybody's...
Right. That's why I stopped reading X-Men eventually. I was burned out. I was like, Morlock Tunnel, Wolverine's walking through the Morlock Tunnel, and he smells Jean Grey's scent, and then nothing happens a year later.
Yeah. It's actually, I stopped reading it. It's when the Marauders came in. And when I say this, I was living in Los Angeles. I just got out of the Navy, and I said, well, this could be neat. And when I finished the story, I said, I don't think I want to read. I'd pick them up if there was an artist drawing that I liked, but That's when I stopped. But when we started doing the show, I think that's when Rook and Dallas, I think that's when you guys started reading the X-Men, was around that time.
Yeah, around that time we were kids and we started reading it. And I mean, I loved X-Men all the way up until Age of Apocalypse. Age of Apocalypse happened and I was like, man, that was so good. And it was such a massive crossover event. You had to get all those books, even though it took me years later to actually finally get the last Universe X book. But they immediately went from that to Onslaught, and I'm like, no, I'm done.
Yeah, he went everywhere and never tied up. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, there were two things I want to say, and we can wrap up. But one is for people who are, I don't have any affiliation with this website, but for people who are like interested in seeing comic book scripts, there's a site called comicsexperience.com. It has a script archive where you can see like scripts that have been produced, like Alan Moore scripts, Kelly Sue DeConnick scripts, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which I think, especially as an artist, is good because you can download it, draw it, and then look up how the other artists who actually drew it approached it and have a good comparison. And when you see an Alan Moore script, it is ridiculous. He spends like 2 pages describing a single panel. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. So that's a good resource for anybody. And then I was going to say about Rod Serling, creator of Twilight Zone, definite influence. So I loved that show all growing up, and then I looked him up and learned more about him.
Yeah.
And I learned that this dude, he was not a fan of sci-fi or fantasy.
Yeah.
So he spent, you might know this, Tom, but he spent like 12 years just trying to write about like war, racism, sexism, kept getting censored. And then basically after 12 years of that, he decided if I hide my stuff in fantasy and sci-fi, they won't censor me. So he sat down with Ray Bradbury and was like, tell me how to write sci-fi. So
I didn't know that.
So that's how Twilight Zone was born, was him trying to figure out another way to get his messages out.
Right.
On YouTube, there's an audio recording of him giving a commencement speech at UCLA in 1966.
Yes.
They brought him on because he's a Twilight Zone guy. He used it as an occasion to advocate for civil rights.
Awesome.
Oh.
Yes, and I was like, go ahead. And he, I was born in Ithaca, New York, because my parents went to school at Cornell, and he died in Ithaca a month and a half before I was born in Ithaca. And so sometimes I joke that I'm him reincarnated. You guys make of it what you will. Close point to it.
Wow.
Listen, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time with us today.
Yes.
And really, anytime you want to talk about any projects that you're working on, you got Kickstarters going, definitely let us know. We'd be happy to have you back on.
Yeah, always welcome.
I appreciate it. Right on.
And if you just want to hang sometime, give us a call.
Right on.
You can come on. It's been great fun. Everybody listening, if you like to draw, we use a fake comic book cover for every episode we do. It's on the Facebook page and the Facebook group. We can't pay you for it, but it'll be yours to own. And if you'd allow us to, we'll add it to the cover gallery. Nobody, as we talk about this thing, nobody thinks they're really good. We'll like it. A lot of people comment on these. They enjoy the covers. I can't wait to get these every week when they come in. We didn't have a music break on this episode, even though we did have a musician. But we're always looking for any kind of music. If you have recorded stuff, we'll be happy to get it, and we'll play it on the Music Spotlight. Again, the few I've gotten from people, they're always like, well, if you don't want to play it, we don't. We've loved everything we've gotten. So feel free, listen to R. Allen, just put the stuff out and get it done. Anyway, that's about it.
Don't forget, guys, to check out our website, bunchofdorks.com. Just click on the Cyclops, where you can find all of our information and all of our links. Also, grab a t-shirt while you're there. Until next time, thank you for listening. And don't forget,
read
more
comics.
You can hear our most recent 20 episodes on iTunes. If you would like to hear our older episodes, you can find them on our blog. Just go to bunchofdorks.com and click on the Cyclops.
Your Dimension can be found on iTunes and Stitcher Radio. If you like what you hear, you can subscribe, rate, leave a review, tell a friend, or like us on Facebook. Thanks for listening.